This is the Raspberry Pi, or MusicPi as I think I'm going to call it, slider. I'm not even completely positive what this little toy musical slider thing is professionally called. I'm sure I had looked that up at some point. Anyway, what I have is a GT2 3D printer belt here. I think that's 21T. Bought it online as a whole kit with the idler pulleys, these toothed pulleys, after I bought the NEMA 17 motor. So that's all hooked up to this housing, this wooden housing that I made here. It's just clamped together. You can see a couple of clamps there. And this is here just to make it out. It's out here to make it tight. And these little springs came with it also to keep it tight. But I don't think it's tight enough, or it's too tight or something, so I bought these flat little idler pulleys. And I'm going to rearrange how these go on here somewhere. Maybe using this spare motor mount that I have, just because it has an adjuster there. Anyway, this slider works. This is a kind of a cob job, or MacGyver job, as I like to call it. These things are kind of floating there on these rods that I bought from Lowe's. And then the air tube, it's a nylon fitting. And I use that polycapsitone stuff that you heat up, you boil. And then that's perfectly on the slider there. And the slider just moves with this platform. So I reset it back to the beginning, and I have software that makes the stepper move the appropriate amount to move the platform to the left or to the right, which is down or up on the scale. Moving the slider moves the slider this way. And again, kind of a cob job for now, just for testing. You can just see the end of that slider there. I'll list the type of slider I bought. I think it was $5 or something. Again, just for testing for now. And I just have some screws. Maybe they're about 4 or 5s. It really doesn't matter. With some springs that keep that kind of locked in the up direction. So as the stepper moves left or right, clockwise or counterclockwise, the platform moves, which moves the slider up or down and changes the scale. This nylon to brass fitting to just a little fish tank nylon tube. That fish tank nylon tube goes all the way, let's see if I can trace it back behind the scenes here, to this little baby compressor I brought from Harbor Freight for $40, something like that. And that just simply is another brass fitting that attaches back to the air compressor. Note that the air compressor, this one anyway, has a little gauge, and I had to turn back the pressure on this little red dial there purposely to not get all of the pressure capable from the compressor, because it's just too darn loud. So I had to turn it back real low, and you'll see if you ever experiment with this how that needs to happen, or why that needs to happen. Also note that the compressor does not need to be turned on. The actual compressor motor itself does not need to be turned on to make all this work. Once you build up pressure in the tank, this one's a little 100 psi tank. Once you have 100 psi of pressure, that'll play like a whole song, I've figured out. In fact, you'll see in a second, even with, whatever that says, about 60 psi, that's plenty enough for probably an entire song. And you'll see how on the second gauge there, I got it turned up to 2, which is probably a little bit high. I'm going to turn it down a little bit so that sneaks down. About 1 is a pretty good pitch, at least for this exact instrument. That's pretty close. Anyway, and then this electric solenoid, I'll get into the wires in a separate thing, but the positive wire just goes back to a 12-volt power supply. And then I have a diode between the positive and negative, just because you're supposed to. And then the negative goes to a MOSFET. This little MOSFET there, I got a heat sink on it. And these wires, again, which I'll explain in a photograph and a different thing here, they all go back to a Raspberry Pi. I got an Adafruit stepper motor hat on my Raspberry Pi, so that kind of changes the top look of the Raspberry Pi. But again, I'll get into all of that in a separate thing. But that's kind of how all that comes together. And I got just a little setup on the floor here of that's how I control my Raspberry Pi, and I have Ubuntu there that connects remotely and a database and all that stuff. I'll get into the software separately, but I'll hit us this Python script that I made, that svsarg thing there, the number 4. That tells it which song to play, and I'll get into that as well. So this is supposed to be kind of a Godfather-ish tune. It's supposed to be. The pitch is off, though, and I think it's because that motor's slipping. But anyway, here we go. Oh. Let's do that again. I didn't have enough pressure on it. Move it back to the beginning, which the script does, and let's do that again. And it works. Now let me pause it and play the whole song. Okay, here's the whole song.